Thank you very much for the invitation to the Foundation. I'm very pleased to be here. Lisbon is a beautiful city, but this I don't have to tell you. The weather is just wonderful, and the last days in Italy were just cold and rainy, so it's a change coming here. And I like to have the opportunity to talk to the people, as it's now in fashion to say. And so when I was invited, I accepted happily the invitation. Talking about the metaphor, I have two things to say. The first is that in my life, as I walked through my life, I never once thought that I could become a minister. So if it happened to me, it may also happen to you. Think of this. The second observation is that I interpret moving ahead in life as facing uncertainty. We are surrounded by uncertainty. We don't know what it will be next day, next year. Our life will be, whether it will be a success, whether it will be happy. We don't know, we simply don't know. And we face many, many risks. So today, I would like to talk about welfare. And welfare is our collective answer to the risk that people, some risk at least, that people face in their life. So you see the title is Europe and the Welfare State, and I would say something about the welfare state in Europe, and I just say that this is something that we have to defend, but we also have to reform. And reforms are necessary, but are not popular and are not easy, although they are, as I said, a necessity. So just another thing before I leave this, you would ask, why has she this? It has because I have happened to notice this, and I took because I wasn't sure to remember. It is estudar, divulgar, debater. I don't know whether this is the right pronunciation, but I understand what it means. And this, I think it's the motto of the Foundation, and it is exactly in my spirit. Because what I've done after being a minister, it was 18 months, a year and a half, very difficult. I went back to the university, and in the university, I tried to do exactly what here, estudar, divulgar, talking to the people, and debater, having a dialogue. Having a dialogue with the people, with citizens, is very important. That's why I feel completely, let's say, in tune with this. So, welfare is very large because the risks that people face are many, and the risks start at the beginning of the life cycle. The life cycle is an economic term that was invited by our only Nobel laureate in economics, who is Franco Modigliani, and he developed this theory of life cycle. Life cycle starts at the beginning, and you may be born in a wealthy family or in a very poor family, in a city that offers you a lot, or in a very, very poor village. And one thing is that welfare should start at the beginning, giving the possibility of accessing education to everybody. This is just an important message, which we should never forget. Access, free access to education. The second one is that we have a working life. The working life is the most important part in terms of length of our life. First we have education, then we work, then we retire. The working life is also full of risk, and we have welfare exactly to face those risks. For example, unemployment is very important. But we don't buy an insurance policy in the marketplace because the marketplace does not provide an insurance policy with respect to unemployment. So we do want a public insurance with respect to unemployment or to other things that may happen in your working life. But then in your working life, what do? You prepare for retirement. And you prepare for retirement in terms of providing saving for consumption in old age. That is what a pension is. And although the welfare system should cover the whole individual's life, I will talk mostly about pensions and pension reforms, because this is, in many European countries, by far the largest part of our welfare system, which somehow is not so healthy. So what is a pension? People have all the different ideas about pension. They all talk in public debates, in TV programs. It's a dream or it's a nightmare for somebody. Reforms. Every day, international institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, the European Commission, they ask governments to reform their pension system. And so governments consider that this is very difficult, and they don't particularly like, because pension reforms are quite unpopular. The opposition objects, the trade unions demonstrate, and the expert, what do the experts? They usually disagree. And then everyone has his own interest. And what I want to say is that welfare, that is social insurance, comes from sticking together. It's insurance, and insurance comes when people stick together. The first insurance is family. The second insurance is maybe a group, an occupation, but the largest is a country, and maybe even more countries together. So there are diverging views about, I have taken a few quotes. One is from the author of Harry Potter, and there was the worry of the parents of the author saying, with all your imagination, how are you going to secure you a pension? They were worrying about this, and she earned millions of pounds by writing books about Harry Potter. So maybe it was unjustified to have these worries. Then there are other people that say, for example, take the story of Detroit's bankruptcy was simple enough. Allow capitalism to grow the city, campaign against income inequality, tax the job creators until they flee, increase government spending in order to boost employment, promise generous pension plans to keep people voting for failure. Rinse, wash, and repeat. That is Dan Shapiro on the perfect recipe to failure. And then there are other people that simply say, okay, chase your passion, not your pension. So there are very, very different views about pensions, but what is a pension? Exactly because many people have different ideas. What is a pension? A pension is not just a normal, let's say, saving product. No. A pension is an insurance product. It has insurance. This morning, we heard a lot about longevity. We heard a lot about people wanting to live forever, but they have to provide a pension if they want to live forever. And a pension is something that is a promise of payment until you are alive, which is not certain. It is by definition uncertain. Your length of life is by definition uncertain. And again, what I want to say is you want to buy a pension? Very easy. You go to an insurance company, you have some saving, you have a contract, you say, okay, I'd like to save 100 euro per month, give it to you, you invest in financial markets, and when I am maybe 65, you pay me a pension for as long as I live. And the insurance companies say, okay, no problem to do that. But we don't do that. Mostly in our European countries, we don't buy our pensions in the insurance market. We stick to the public insurance. So it is our welfare system, okay? Our welfare system. And this is very important because the way we organize our pension system is very different from the way an insurance company organizes. I said the insurance company takes your money and puts it in financial markets. Financial markets are risky. They are. Also, public insurance is risky, and we will see. What does the public insurance, public social security does? Takes all the people that work and take contributions because it's a public institution, is not regulated, it's not a market mechanism, but it is regulated by law. So it's law, it's parliament that defines the rules. How much do workers have to pay on their earnings to provide a pension? And the state pension agency takes the contributions and uses immediately to pay for pension. The systems are normally, as they are called, pay as you go. It means you are the workers, you pay, I take the money, I use the money to pay immediately, as we go, their pensions. So there is no accumulation, no reserves, no financial markets involved. But the thing is, two important things. The first is you can see that this is an intergenerational contract. It's a contract between, let's call you, the working group, the young. Let's call them the retirees, the older generations, okay? It's a compact between generations with the other one, those who are still unborn, waiting to enter your position while walking down the life, you are waiting to enter their position. And why are you participating in this contract? Why are you participating? Not only because the government forces you, because it's compulsory, but also because you believe that when you will be there, the new generation will be here in your place and will be able and available to pay contributions which will be used to pay for your own pension. So there is a contract. Why do I stress this? Because when politicians design the system, when they make laws about the retirement age, they have to think not only of present generations, but also future generations, because the state has to also represent them. That is the question why we have a public system, that the state should also take into consideration and to try an equilibrium between current and future generations. So that is the important message is the market is risky, but also the public system is risky. What are the main risks of a pension system? Easily said. One is this, very important. No, I want to, yes, this. It's what we call population aging. We had a long discussion this morning about aging from the point of view of the individuals mainly, what aging means for individuals. Now we have a perspective of what it means, an aging population for society. Look at this, this picture, and it shows that 2 countries are going faster on aging. And those countries are Italy and Japan. The graph shows you what is called the old age dependency ratio. It means the ratio of people 65 plus and over the population of working age. Normally it is 1664, okay? And as far as Europe is concerned, in the next 4 decades, most of European countries are going to double, more than double sometimes, the old age dependency ratio, which means a lot in terms of our society, how society is shaped, and it means a lot in terms of our economy, because an economy where we have a much larger fraction of older people maybe is less productive, and so we need to adopt technologies to somehow compensate for the lower productivity of an aging population. And here you have the same thing, but here you also have Portugal. Portugal is here, and you see that it corresponds, the color, to the darkest color there, which means that Portugal is the same as Greece, a bit more than Italy in terms of aging. So Portugal has to face and to organize society and the economy and everything, families, with respect to fast population aging. That is a huge, a dramatic change that we will have to face. Just a short parenthesis. Think that Europe will have a decreasing population. In the next 40 years, the population in Europe will decrease by 40 million people, something like that. In the same period, the countries that are facing the Mediterranean Sea in Africa, so the other side of the Mediterranean Sea, they will increase by 200 million. So you see the imbalance, and this should give our politicians, let's say, to think that it's not just possible to put barriers when the imbalances are like this. And maybe this is also something for our pension system in terms of design. Again, on this demographic change, I want to show the example of Italy. Here is what is called the population pyramid. Here you have men, and here is women, okay? So here is the newborn up to 4 years old, and then as you go up, you have the oldest. And you see it's a pyramid. It's a clear pyramid. The year is 71. Look at the same pyramid in 2011. You see the difference of the shape. You see the decrease in the younger cohort, and these are called, in all countries, are the baby boomers, the numerous cohorts that were born in the 50s, early 60s, because there was growth and so on and so on. So these are approaching retirement or are already retired. So it means that we have lots of people that are have just retired or are going to retire. And this is what we will have in 2061. And you see the changes, what is called the inverted pyramid, because you have few young people and a lot of older generations. It is like you are more numerous, and I said before, you are the ones who work. You pay contributions, and I use the contributions to pay for their pensions, and they are less numerous. Now, invert, they are those who work, and you are the retirees. So they have to pay much more to pay for the same pensions or even for larger pensions and for longer pensions. So for them, it's more difficult to bear. In terms of generosity, the politicians have to think that it's very popular to be generous with respect to people that are near retirement or not so far from retirement, but you have to think of the burden you put on young generations. And that is the demographic risk. But it's not the major risk of a pension system. There is also the economic risk. Now, let's consider that you were the generation that worked in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, okay? The jobs then were stable. A person could enter a firm and leave the firm when he was 60 or 58 to retire. Now consider the generations of the young now. What do they have? Just precarious jobs. Their income is not only precarious in that they have interrupted careers. They enter, then they exit, they work part-time, and they have term contract instead of having open-ended contracts. So, and they have to pay contributions to pay for your pensions. And so how is it? They have to pay contributions for your pensions, but they also have the contributions are also the basis to calculate their future pensions. But if they have little work and inadequate salaries, how can they prepare for retirement? And what does this mean? It means a very, very fundamental thing, that the best premises for a good pension system is a well-performing labor market. And this means if you have an economy, I'm talking now to you because you have now an economy which is growing, and keep the economy growing, please. If the economy is growing, the number of jobs is larger, and possibly the quality of those jobs is better, and possibly the productivity is higher, and so the contributions, the salaries and the contributions are also higher. If the economy is stagnating or indeed regressing because you have negative growth, okay, that can be a disaster. That is the economic risk, because with an economy that allows for a large unemployment rate and only for small jobs, mini jobs, temporary jobs, it's very, very difficult. So again, there is a lesson here. When you see politicians, let's say, engaged in promising the young for generous future pension, you should think it would be much better if they were engaging in trying to provide jobs, in trying to sustain the economy, in trying to say that the economy is encouraged when there is investment, so there is saving that goes to investment in physical capital, investment in infrastructure, but also investment in education, which is fundamental to secure a job in the new technological era. Otherwise, you only have very small like riders, which are an opportunity, better than nothing, but it's not the job the young generation are looking for. So this is the situation. We have, let's say, 3 huge changes that ask for reforms. The first is aging. The second is economic slowdown, economic crisis and then slowdown. The third, which I just mentioned, is digitalization, robotization of our economy. We have that, and we cannot keep the pension system of the past. We have to adjust our pension system, and that is why we have every day this call for reforms. Please reform your pension system. Not because of some wishful thinking, but because of this change. And reforms, now let's think about reform. What is a reform? Most people in Italy think a reform is an act of parliament. Parliament reforms something, there is an act, there is a new law, and that is a reform. No, that is not. That is a legislative act. A reform is something that lives in society, that changes our behavior, that induces us to, for example, work longer, knowing that we live longer. Induce us not to accept irregular jobs, moonlight jobs, where employers do not pay any contribution. So a reform is something, I've taken a few definitions, and I like, let's take the last one, to give up or cause to give up a reprehensible habit or a moral way of life. And you may think this has to do with drug consumption, but it also has to do in public life with piling up debt, public debt. Isn't that immoral with respect to the new generation? It's very easy. You promise everything, and you say, well, we'll pay in the future. They will pay. But that is immoral. That can be immoral. Not every debt is immoral, of course, but simply piling up debt can be immoral. And we have 2 kinds of debt. One is the one that is represented by bonds and bills and all the government paper. And the other one is represented by pension promises, because a pension promise is not much different from a public bond. So it's another way to create debt and burden the future generation. So if this is a reform, what I want to say is that people dislike reform. And my idea, and also my experience, is that people do not like reform because they interpret reforms as a bitter medicine to cure something which we don't recognize, or even worse. In Italy, reforms were communicated to the public. The press, where's Jose? Jose has disappeared. In any case, the press has a big responsibility, because our reforms were discussed in public as mere austerity. Austerity, even worse, to save the German bank. Can you imagine the Italian people to do sacrifices to save the German bank? Can you imagine that they accept the reform? No, they don't. They are very unhappy. They are angry. They are irritated. They resent the reform if reforms are presented like this. Not like a way to re-equilibrate intergenerational balances. And so my way, let's say, to present the reform is this. look, we have a pension system. And the question is this pension system sustainable in the future? And here we measure sustainability, okay? And sustainability, you could say, we have higher sustainability with pension systems that are less generous. So sustainability is here, and generosity or adequacy of benefit is here, okay? And for example, if you have a very generous system, you are here in terms of generosity, but you are hardly sustainable, meaning that you are burdening too much. And if you interpret reform just as moving along this line, that is the wrong idea of a reform, because a reform is something like this. What does it mean? It means that you are changing things in a way as to promote efficiency in the system. I will give you an example not to seem too abstract. And you see, it's not a trick, but you can have the same adequacy with a more sustainable system with respect to the previous one. And I give you examples. Imagine that you have what we had called early retirement, and a pension formula that says, well, when you are 56, you can retire. And the formula is such that if you continue to work, you lose something, which is crazy. Because if you continue to work, you contribute more to the system, and you will live 1 year less as a retiree. So you should be rewarded for your work. But our formula was such as penalize people that wanted to continue. And that is an inefficiency. And many other things were, for example, inducing the employer and the employee to say, okay, let's share the contribution. I work irregularly, you don't pay the contribution, and we share this. I have more pocket money, and you pay less. But this is damaging the system and myself now. In the past, the system was such as if you work irregularly, you would not lose as much as you should to induce regular work. So there are various things that you can do in a reform which are for both sustainability and adequacy of system. Making people to understand this is not easy, and particularly when the reform is presented just in terms of sacrifice. Why is reform so difficult? I said before, because people interpret the reform, they say it is my own right. Retiring after 38, 40 years of contribution, it is my right. And if you say, but look, if you retire now with this pension, somebody else is going to pay, for example, 20% of your pension. And if these people who are paying part of your pension are younger and maybe less lucky than you were, that is not just right, okay? So there is a lot of redistribution, and why it is difficult for politicians to enact reform, particularly because it is in favor of the young and the older generations, when there is aging, are more numerous, so they represent the majority of voters, and also they participate more in the political life than the young generations. So it's very difficult, and you have to cut benefits, you have to redress some imbalances. It's so difficult. But explaining is important. And here I take one of the quotes that is my preferred quote. It is this. It is a quote by Jean-Claude Juncker, the present president of the European Commission. Once he said this thing, it's quite famous. He said, we all know what has to be done. What we don't know is how to be re-elected once we have done it. And I've always disliked very much this quote. Why? Because it establishes a dichotomy between we, the enlightened people, maybe the politicians and the technocrats, the university professors, the experts. We are the enlightened and we know why the reform has to be enacted and so and so. But them, the poor people, they don't understand and so they are going to punish us. But if it is like this, the solution is simple. Let's explain the reform to the people. Let the people participate, because if the reform is needed for the reasons we have seen before, then you should be able to convince the people. And if you do the right thing, so for example, not giving more privileges, but cutting privileges where the system is, then people should understand, and they are not happy of a reform, but they are less unhappy. So that's why, and I just want to tell you this, I have to save time, that I have done an exercise which I found very interesting. I have taken with a colleague of mine, let's take the various reforms. With a colleague of mine, we have taken 20 years, 24 countries, also Portugal we have taken. And what the major international institutions called major reforms. And we have asked a simple question. Is it true that the government that does a reform is punished by the electorate in the next election? And the answer is yes. In terms of the probability to be re-elected, there are many technical issues here, but just to give you the main message. In terms of the probability to be re-elected, if you do a pension reform, the probability drops. So it means that the probability to be re-elected really decreases. Okay, it means people don't like pension reforms. But now, if you insert in the exercise some indicator of economic literacy, okay, it means how people understand of the basic things of the economic life and the pension system, what we have found is that in those cases where the economic literacy is higher, the probability to be re-elected drops much less, so it's much less reduced. So this is obvious. Where people understand the necessity of reforms, reforms are less opposed. And that is why, in my own experience, and as an important, I would say, drive for social change, I think that we need reforms in various fields. We need to have people on board, but not by telling them lies, not by selling easy illusions, but by telling the truth and saying, okay, this is the direction we have to go. And if we are together, insurance is being together, sticking together, maybe we can change together and improve our society. That is an important message. But politicians sometimes prefer to exploit people's ignorance, because it's much easier to say, oh, you are such an unfortunate guy or woman, and you know, I know the person or the institution who is responsible for your misfortune, and maybe it is the European Union, maybe it is migration, responsible for all our misfortune, maybe it is Elsa Fornero who did the pension reform, maybe sometimes it's an institution, sometimes it's a person. Why do I say this? Because it's a tricky that is quite widely used these days of populism. Personalizing and saying she is responsible for your misfortune, I can solve your problem. That is what is used nowadays. It is completely different from what I was talking about, having people on board by explaining, by having a dialogue, by participating. There is one last example, I still have 4 minutes, one last example I want to tell you. There is something which is usually said in Italy, maybe also in Portugal. They say, okay, let's people retire so that we have jobs for the young, okay? This is usually said. It was said nowadays when the new government changed it, did not cancel in the electoral campaign. They promised to cancel the pension reform of our government. They did not. They suspended it for 3 years, saying, okay, now we open the window so everybody can, or the door, so everybody can exit and be free from the Fornero reform, okay? 3 years. Okay, it's there, but the reform is still there. The law is still there, okay? And the main reason was we want to have jobs for the young people. Is this true? Is this demonstrated empirically? The answer is no. And I have a graph for this, and I want you first to say this. Okay, how would you prove that if you allow people to retire earlier, then you have more jobs for the young? It should be that if you take the employment of the older population, when it is plus, so it increases, it should be that the variation in the employment of the young should be negative. So that if you ask the older population, the older workers to work, there are less jobs for the young. And so the relationship should be negative, okay? But look, the relationship is positive. And this is an OECD. So you see, Portugal is a bit tricky here, but it's here. It's a bit negative here and a bit positive. But the relationship is positive. Now, you may look at the dates and see, oh, this is before the crisis. So it's easy because before the crisis. But look at this. This is after the crisis. And we have complementarity between the jobs for the young and the jobs for the older workers. Why is this? Again, it takes you to the working of the labor market. If the labor market and the economy are working properly, then there are jobs for the young and for the older generation. And we have countries in Europe where the young and women, mind you, because here women should be mentioned specifically, there are jobs for the young and for the older generations. It's only when the labor market does not work properly, then you have to have substitution. And so it says, okay, let's the older leave because we have to make room for the young, and let's women stay at home because we have to make room for men. This is not the way we should go. And that is a misconception, which is, this is what I have talked before, so I just go to the conclusion. The conclusion is this. The conclusion is that aging, the economic slowdown, the technological change ask us as society to reconsider the intergenerational contract. And we have to reconsider this in order to rebalance an equilibrium between generations, not to burden too much future generation. But my point is, please do this not in an emergency like we had to do. We had to do reforms in an emergency when the Italian debt was on was had a high probability of default, and we had to act. I was asked to prepare the pension reform in 2 weeks, Mario Monti said, maximum 20 days, which I did not because we were just naughty people or superheroes, but because it was a tragic situation in which we did not know if the day after there would be resources to pay for doctors in hospital, teachers in school, policemen in the streets, and so on and so on. So it was really tragic. You have time. It seems that your economy is good, so please reform when you can and not just near a collapse. Second thing, explain to the people. So talk to the people. Strengthen social dialogue. People have to understand that reforming a pension or a labor market is not punishment, is like restoring our common house. Transparent information. If you give the wrong messages, of course, people reject. And so these are my, let's say, takeaway for Portugal. And I think I have to finish because now it says that I am in the red light, but okay. But I think from what I have understood of your situation, first, you are a very united country, and that is very good. Second, you are pro-European, and that is also very good. Third, you are a growing economy, and that is essential. And if you continue like this, probably you will be able to avoid, let's say, traumatic changes like we had to enact. Okay.